On September 19th, 1827, a wounded man on a Mississippi sandbar killed a sheriff with a knife his brother gave him. Within a year, every man in America wanted one. Number 6 on this list weighs more than 3 pounds, and collectors still argue about whether it touched Jim Bowie's hand. And number 2 vanished on the morning of March 6, 1836, and men have been digging for it ever since. Hit subscribe because these are 15 forgotten Bowie knives every American man feared and respected. Let's begin. Number 15, the Sheffield coffin-handle Bowie. Here is the strange truth about the most American knife ever made. Most of them came from Sheffield, England. When the Bowie craze exploded in the 1830s, the cutlers of Sheffield smelled money faster than any American blacksmith could hammer out a blade. Factories that had spent a century making table knives for gentlemen retooled overnight to arm the American frontier. Their signature design had a handle shaped exactly like a casket, wide at the shoulder, tapering toward the butt, and nobody pretended the shape was an accident. It was a sales pitch you could hold in your hand. A coffin-handle Bowie cost about $1.50 in a New Orleans hardware store in 1838, roughly 2 days' wages for a laborer, and men paid it gladly. The blade ran 8 to 10 inches with that famous clip point, ground from Sheffield's crucible steel, which held an edge better than almost anything made in America at the time. Steamboat gamblers slid them into boot tops. Planters hung them from belts next to their watch chains. Flatboat men wore them openly, handle forward as a warning. The great irony is that the knife defending American honor in 1,000 tavern disputes said Sheffield, England on the ricasso. American buyers did not care. They cared that the edge shaved hair and the point punched through a wool coat. When the revolver became cheap and reliable in the 1870s, the coffin handle quietly disappeared from belts and into bureau drawers. Today, an authentic one in good condition brings more at auction than the man who first bought it earned in 5 years. Number 14, the Arkansas toothpick. If the Bowie knife was a weapon that could pretend to be a tool, the Arkansas toothpick never bothered pretending. This was the Bowie's darker cousin, a symmetrical, double-edged dagger stretching anywhere from 12 to 20 inches, balanced so it could be thrown as well as thrust. The name was pure frontier humor, the same instinct that named a shovel a banjo and a fist fight a discussion. Nobody picked their teeth with it. In the 1830s, riverboat men and backwoods brawlers carried toothpicks down the spine of the Mississippi Valley, and the weapon developed a reputation so vicious that lawmakers did something almost unheard of. They banned a knife by name. Tennessee passed its act against Bowie knives and Arkansas toothpicks in 1838, slapping heavy penalties on selling or carrying them. Alabama taxed them at rates designed to price them out of honest men's hands. Think about that for a moment. State legislatures were so frightened of a piece of sharpened steel that they wrote it into the criminal code the way we write laws about machine guns today. The bans did about as much good as bans usually do. Men kept carrying them under coats and in saddlebags for another 40 years. The toothpick faded not because of any law, but because the Colt revolver made an 18-inch dagger look like a lot of weight for a weapon you hoped never to use. What survives is the name, still whispered in knife catalogs, and the strange honor of being one of the few blades in American history that scared the government itself. Number 13, the Surles Bowie. Daniel Surles of Baton Rouge made knives the way a fine gunsmith made dueling pistols, slowly, precisely, and for men who could afford the difference. And here is the detail most people never learn. Resin Bowie, Jim's older brother and the man who actually designed the first Bowie knife, chose Surles to make his presentation pieces. When Resin wanted to thank a friend or flatter a politician, he commissioned a Surles blade, had it engraved, and handed over what amounted to the frontier's most dangerous business card. Several of these presentation knives survive, and they tell us something surprising. The Surles Bowie does not look like the movie Bowie at all. There is no dramatic clip point, no brass guard the size of a door hinge. The blade is straight-backed, elegant, almost restrained, closer to a chef's knife with lethal intentions than the Rambo silhouette in your head. The handles were checkered ebony or ivory, the mounts were silver, and the whole package said this belongs to a gentleman, which in the 1830s in Louisiana meant a man perfectly willing to kill you politely. A Surles knife cost many times what a Sheffield import ran, and owning one placed you in a specific social class, the planters and lawyers and duelists of the lower Mississippi. Collectors today consider documented Surles Bowies among the crown jewels of American cutlery, and when one surfaces at auction, the bidding starts where most people's mortgages end. The forgotten lesson is this: the first real Bowie knives were not crude frontier choppers. They were luxury goods, and the men who carried them feared losing face far more than losing blood. Number 12, the Samuel Bell Dogbone Bowie. Samuel Bell started as a silversmith and mayor of Knoxville, Tennessee, which sounds like a respectable way to spend a life until you learn what he did next. In the early 1850s, he packed up and moved to San Antonio, Texas, a town that was still burying men from knife fights on a regular schedule, and became the most celebrated knife maker on the southwestern frontier. His signature was the dog bone handle, a grip that flared at both ends like the bone in a cartoon. Usually carved from ivory and mounted in silver. He worked himself. It looks almost delicate in photographs. In the hand, that flared shape locked into the palm, so the knife could not slide forward when it hit something that resisted. Texas Rangers carried bells, cattlemen carried bells, men riding for the Confederacy carried bells, and men hunting Comanche raiders across the Nueces Strip carried bells. A silver-mounted Bell Bowie cost around $15 to $20 at a time when a cowhand earned $1 a day, so a bell on your belt announced your bank account as loudly as your intentions. The old man kept his shop on the San Antonio Plaza for decades, and his sons carried the business into the 20th century, but the frontier that needed his knives dried up around them. Today, the Dogbone Bowie is a museum piece, sitting in glass cases in Texas, polished and silent. Most visitors walk past without knowing they are looking at the sidearm of the men who held the bloodiest border in North America. Number 11, the California Gold Rush Bowie. When gold hit the American River in 1848, 100,000 men crossed an ocean or a continent to reach a place with almost no courts, no jails, and no sheriffs worth the name. What kept order in the diggings was a miners' committee, a rope, and the knife on every man's hip. San Francisco cutlers like Michael Price and the firm of Will and Fink built the finest Bowies ever produced on this continent to serve that market, and they built them with a swagger that matched the city. Gold quartz set into the handles, abalone shell shimmering like oil on water, silver sheaths engraved with the owner's name, because in a mining camp, your knife might be the only identification your body carried home. A top-grade Price Bowie ran $50 or more, a fortune, and gamblers and claim owners paid it because in San Francisco of the 1850s, a beautiful knife worked like a beautiful watch works today. It told strangers you were a man of consequence before you said a word. These were not wall hangers. The blades were forged hard and ground thin, made to be used at card tables and claim boundaries where a dispute could go from words to steel between heartbeats. Vigilance committees hanged men whose knives had been busy, and the knives themselves passed to new owners and kept working. Then the placer gold thinned out. The city grew courts and constables, and the great San Francisco Bowies retired into bank vaults. Collectors now call them the finest American knives of the 19th century. The miners just called them insurance. Number 10, the Confederate D-Guard Bowie. Here's where things get interesting because this is the knife that shows you what happens when fear meets a blacksmith's forge. In the spring of 1861, tens of thousands of young Southern men marched off to war convinced it would be settled hand to hand, and they wanted steel for the settling. Village blacksmiths across Georgia, Alabama, and the Carolinas answered by hammering out the biggest knives in American history. D-guard Bowies, named for the iron loop that curved from guard to pommel like the letter D, protecting the knuckles like a cutlass. Some blades stretched past 18 inches. Many were forged from whatever steel the county could spare. Old files, rasps, sawmill blades, even wagon springs. And you can still see the file teeth ghosting through the finish on surviving examples. Boys posed for tin types, clutching them across their chests, trying to look like the death of the Union itself. And then reality arrived. The war turned out to be rifled muskets at 300 yards, and a 3-pound knife is a miserable thing to carry on a 20-mile march. By 1862, the roadsides of Virginia were littered with discarded D-guards, thrown away by the same boys who had begged their fathers for them a year earlier. The ones that stayed in service became camp tools, splitting kindling and butchering hogs. It is one of the most honest artifacts America ever produced. Every D-guard Bowie is a photograph of the moment before a country understood what modern war actually was. Number 9. The Etched Sheffield Presentation Bowie. The English cutlers did not just build knives for the American market. They studied the American soul and etched it on the blade. Firms like George Wostenholm, whose IXL trademark meant I excel, shipped Bowies across the Atlantic with slogans acid etched down the flat of the blade in flowing script: death to traitors, equal rights and equal laws, the land of the free and the home of the brave. Celebrated American hunting knife. A worker in Sheffield who had never seen the Mississippi was writing frontier poetry for men in Natchez, and it sold like whiskey. The etching turned a weapon into a statement, and in the decade before the Civil War, the statements sharpened with the times. Blades sold in the South carried states' rights mottos. Blades sold in the North carried the Union forever. The same factory, the same steel, opposite prayers, and Sheffield cashed both checks without blinking. Wostenholm's Washington Works ran huge grinding shops, largely on American orders. And when the panic of 1857 hit or war interrupted shipping, whole neighborhoods of English grinders went hungry because Alabama stopped buying. Think about how strange that is. The economic health of a Yorkshire mill town rose and fell on how dangerous life felt in Mississippi. After the war, the etched Bowie faded with the market that loved it, and surviving examples are time capsules, political bumper stickers, and steel. Pick one up today and you are holding exactly what an American man wanted the world to know about him in 1855, written in acid, worn on his belt. Number 8. The Buffalo Hunter's Bowie. Between 1870 and 1883, a few thousand professional hunters destroyed the great bison herds of the plains, and the Bowie knife did most of the actual work. The Sharps rifle got the glory and the photographs, but a rifle only drops the animal. Everything after that, the money part, belonged to the knife. A skinner working a stand of 40 or 50 dead buffalo went through the same brutal routine from first light to dark. Slit, peel, pull, move here to the next carcass, with a wagon following to collect hides worth $2 to $3 each in Dodge City. A good skinner handled 30 to 50 animals a day, and no edge on earth holds up to that. So the hunters carried heavy bowies with broad bellies of soft, tough steel, and they carried a sharpening steel right beside them, touching up the blade dozens of times a day, until the knife itself wore visibly thinner season by season. Firms like John Russell's Green River Works and the big Sheffield houses shipped these working bowies west by the crate, plain wood handles, no etching, no silver, $1 or $2 apiece. The men who used them stank of grease and blood for months at a time and were feared in every cow town they entered, less for violence than for the look of men who killed for wages at industrial scale. When the southern herd collapsed in 1878 and the northern herd followed 5 years later, the skinning bowies simply stopped, like tools at the end of a shift that never resumed. They are the least romantic knives on this list, and they changed the continent more than all the duelists combined. Number 7. The Edwin Forrest Bowie. This one comes with a story attached, and the story is the point. Edwin Forrest was the first great American-born stage star, a barrel-chested tragedian who played heroes and killers to packed houses, the closest thing the 1830s had to a movie star. According to the tradition passed down with the knife, Forrest crossed paths with James Bowie himself while traveling in the South. The actor and the fighter took a liking to each other, and Bowie presented Forrest with one of his own knives, a massive blade with a distinctive curved handle. Forrest treasured it for the rest of his life, and the knife survives today in a museum collection, one of the very few blades on Earth with even a claimed personal connection to Jim Bowie. Now, historians argue about the details, as historians do. What nobody argues about is what the gift meant. In the 1830s, being handed a knife by Jim Bowie was like being handed a guitar by Elvis. Bowie was a living legend by then. The Sandbar duel retold in every newspaper, and everything he touched turned to myth on contact. Forrest understood the value. He was a man who made his living on legend, and he displayed the knife the way a knight displayed a relic. Here's the detail that gets forgotten. Forrest went on to become so famous and so combative that a riot between his fans and a rival English actor's fans killed more than 20 people in New York in 1849. The knife's owner ended up nearly as dangerous as the knife's maker. Number 6, the Muso Bowie. Now we reach the most argued about knife in America. In the 1970s, a Hollywood artist and collector named Joseph Muso bought an enormous antique Bowie, and enormous is not an exaggeration. The blade runs about 14 inches, the whole knife over 19, and it weighs in the neighborhood of 3 pounds, more short sword than knife. Two details set the collecting world on fire. First, a strip of brass runs along the spine of the blade, matching old accounts that Bowie's knife carried soft brass on its back to catch and trap an opponent's edge before it could bite. Second, initials are cut into it that believers read as a direct link to Jim Bowie himself. If the Muso Bowie is what its supporters claim, it may be the knife, or at least a knife from Bowie's own hand, possibly even the pattern behind the Alamo blade. If the skeptics are right, it is a magnificent old knife wearing a borrowed legend. Metal tests have been run. Experts have squinted at it for 50 years. The argument has never been settled, and honestly, that is why it belongs at number 6. The Muso Bowie proves that a century and a half after his death, Jim Bowie can still make grown men fight, just with auction paddles and laboratory reports instead of steel. Every few years, the knife resurfaces at an exhibit. Crowds line up, and somewhere in the line, a man whispers to his son, "They say that was Jim Bowie's knife." That whisper is worth more than the brass. Number 5, Bowie. Number 1. Number 1. In the little town of Washington, Arkansas, on the old Southwest Trail, a blacksmith named James Black ran a shop in the early 1830s, and legend says Jim Bowie himself stopped there in 1830 and ordered a knife. Black, the story goes, made the knife Bowie asked for, then made a second version incorporating his own ideas, and Bowie chose Black's. From that shop, tradition says, came the true Bowie knife. Here is where the story turns tragic, and it is a genuinely dark piece of American history. Black was said to guard a secret steel-making process, tempering blades behind a leather curtain so no one could watch. In 1838, he was savagely beaten in a family dispute, his eyesight destroyed. Years later, dying and blind, he tried to dictate his secret process to the man caring for him, and found he could no longer remember it. Whatever Black knew, if he knew anything at all, died in that room. Historians fight over every line of this story, and some doubt Black made knives for Bowie at all. But stand in front of Bowie number 1 in Little Rock and watch the visitors. Nobody reads the skeptical footnotes. They lean in close to the glass, looking at the knife America decided to believe in. Number 4, the Rio Grande camp knife. South Texas in the middle of the 19th century was a war that never had the decency to declare itself. Ranchers, vaqueros, rangers, raiders, and bandits shared a brush country where the nearest law might be 4 days' ride, and the knife that ruled that country was a monster the trade came to call the camp knife. Picture a Bowie built by a man who expected his knife to do everything. Blades of 10 to 14 inches, heavy enough to chop mesquite for a fire, split a beef carcass, clear a path through thorn brush, and end an argument, all before supper. San Antonio makers built them, Mexican smiths in the border towns built them, and Sheffield shipped its own versions the moment it noticed the market. The camp knife had no pretensions. Handles were plain wood or stag, guards were simple iron, and the finish was whatever survived the brush. What made men respect it was pure capability. A revolver held 6 shots and hated dust and rain. The camp knife never misfired, never rusted shut at the wrong moment, and never ran empty. Trail crews pushing longhorns north after the Civil War carried camp knives to Kansas, where Eastern journalists saw them on cowboys' belts and helped weld the Bowie knife to the cowboy myth forever. Then barbed wire closed the open range, the trail drives ended, and the great camp knives shrank generation by generation into the hunting knives at your local hardware store, which are their direct domesticated grandchildren. Number 3, the Iron Mistress Bowie. Here is the twist nobody expects in a list of old knives. The most influential Bowie of the 20th century was a movie prop. In 1952, Warner Brothers released The Iron Mistress, with Alan Ladd playing Jim Bowie, and the studio needed a knife worthy of the title. What the prop makers created was gorgeous and dramatic. A long, polished blade with a sweeping clip point, a bold brass guard, the Bowie of imagination rather than the plainer blades of history. The movie was forgettable, the knife was not. American men came out of theaters wanting that knife the way their grandsons would want a lightsaber, and the cutlery industry delivered. Custom makers took commissions for Iron Mistress copies. Factories redesigned their hunting knife lines with clip points and brass. Within a few years, the Western W49 and a wave of similar production Bowies put the movie silhouette on hardware store shelves from Maine to California, and a whole generation of boys in the 1950s, drunk on Davy Crockett coonskin caps and Frontier television, saved allowance money for one. Stop and appreciate what happened. The real Bowie knife had spent 70 years dying, killed off by the revolver and the closing of the frontier. Then Hollywood performed a resurrection, and the version that came back was the legend, not the fact. Every big-bellied, brass-guarded knife sold as a Bowie today, every blade, Crocodile Dundee, ever flashed on screen descends from a 1952 prop department. The Iron Mistress is the reason you picture the Bowie knife the way you do. Number 2, the Alamo Bowie. Sometime before dawn on March 6, 1836, Mexican soldiers came over the walls of a crumbling mission in San Antonio, and in a small room off the low barracks, Jim Bowie lay dying of illness on a cot, too weak to stand. Every account agrees on what was in his hands, the knife. The stories of those final minutes vary wildly. Some say he emptied his pistols and used the blade until the end. Others that the end came fast, but when the smoke cleared, the most famous knife in the world was simply gone. No soldier's memoir reliably tracks it. No museum ever produced it with proof. It vanished into the sack of the Alamo, along with everything else worth carrying, and it has been missing for 190 years. That absence created the greatest treasure hunt in American cutlery. For generations, knives have surfaced in Mexico and Texas with whispered stories, carried home by a soldado, traded to a ranchero, found in a trunk in Monterey. Every single one has failed the test of proof, and several were outright fakes built to catch rich collectors. Think about what the finder would actually have. Not just a knife, but the physical ending of the Alamo story, the object in Jim Bowie's hands at the moment he became immortal. Serious collectors quietly admit it would be the most valuable American blade in existence, worth millions before the auctioneer finished his sentence. Somewhere, in a drawer in Coahuila or a collection in Dallas, it may still exist, unrecognized. That possibility has kept men searching for nearly 2 centuries. And finally, number 1, The Sandbar fight knife, the blade that started it all. September 19th, 1827. A dueling party rows out to a sandbar in the Mississippi River near Natchez, because the sandbar sits outside any state's clean jurisdiction. The two principals fire their pistols, miss, shake hands, and the affair should be over. Then the seconds and spectators, men carrying months of feuds, open fire on each other, and Jim Bowie is in the middle of it. What happens next takes about 90 seconds and creates a legend. Bowie is shot through the lung. He is shot again. He is clubbed to the ground with a pistol so hard the pistol breaks. Norris Wright, a sheriff and Bowie's bitter enemy, runs a sword cane into his chest and the blade snags on bone. And Jim Bowie, pinned and bleeding out on the sand, pulls the big knife his brother Resin gave him, drags Wright down, and kills him with it. Bowie somehow survives. The newspapers do the rest. The story of the dying man and the terrible knife races through every paper in the country, growing with each reprinting, and suddenly, every man from Baltimore to Texas is walking into a blacksmith shop asking for a knife like Bowie's. That first blade was probably plain, a big, single-edged, butcher-style knife with no guard worth mentioning, and like the Alamo knife, it is lost. It did not need to survive. It had already done something no other knife in American history ever did. It turned one bloody minute on a sandbar into the most famous edge in the world. So there they are, 15 blades that America feared, respected, and then almost completely forgot. Here's my question for you. Did your family pass one down? Check the attic, check Grandpa's footlocker, because Bowies with real history surface in ordinary houses every single year. Tell me in the comments which knife you would want on your own belt in 1836, the Surles, the Bell, or the big camp knife. And if this brought back the frontier for a few minutes, subscribe, because next week we are digging up more American steel that history tried to bury.